Thank you for that incredibly over-generous introduction. It is absolutely wonderful to be here and to meet so many of you, and thank you for what has been a really, really, really rich and inspiring day. Really, really much appreciated. So I have just a short time to basically share a current passion with you, if that's okay, out of the very many things that could be said. These are the things that I want kids to do, and I don't think there's anything going to come up here. Sorry, I'm going to do this sideways rather than use the clicker, which is a bit temperamental at the moment. There's nothing here that I think you're going to disagree with. I want kids to have some core knowledge on certain topics. I think there are kids. I think there are kids that kids should know about the past. I might have different views about what they are from you, that doesn't matter, but I think we would all agree there's stuff we want kids to know. I want them to remember some of that knowledge, and I want remembering that knowledge not just to be the privilege of the really able ones, or the ones with the supportive parents, or the ones that have got some sort of other advantage. And I want them to be able to use that knowledge to have their own ideas of the past. And I think this is really, really crucial, because pub quizzes are fab, and I'm gutted to be missing tonight's quiz. But if you do just have a random list of stuff in your heads, you're good at pub quizzes, but not a lot else. We've got to help kids get to the point where they can move around within their knowledge, as people with more intelligence than me have said. And to do that, they're going to need sense of period, they're going to need sense of place, they're going to need sense of person. It's that stuff that's often called hinterland knowledge. You know when a kid has got it, because as Will brilliantly referenced this morning, if you read the work of Kate Hammond and the knowledge that flavours the claim, she really digs deep into, you just know when knowledge is secure, and she shows us what secure knowledge really looks like. Those kids with secure knowledge, they adapt their ideas. They can think on their feet. They don't write anachronistically. They're more confident to learn as well somehow. And they're not going to end up those really quite sad people in society who know a lot of stuff but are so fixed and rigid in their views that they can't move out of them. Some of the people that perhaps have been giving Hallie a hard time. I think they've got to realise that the past is complex, but without being overwhelmed. But the way to deal with history is not by making it more simple. It's by finding ways to help people understand the complexity. We've got enough people out there giving simple answers at the moment. It's not going to help us. And, of course, we've got to enjoy learning about the past, because why wouldn't you? But weirdly, some kids don't seem to just enjoy the past, do they? So we've got to keep on at it. So, for me, first person is powerful. And before I just leap into what I want to say about that briefly, stories. This is where I'm coming from, stories. Somebody just said, we have to tell ordinary people's stories. And I'm sitting there going, thanks, Helen. That's a good lead in to what I'm going to say. We know that story is privileged. We've been thinking about that a lot already today. Stories are lovely. They're human. They're sad. They're inspiring. They're all sorts of things. And these are just some of the people who've been stories to me. More less so, but my old history teacher has no social media presence. So that's Francis Hand. Big shout out. Wouldn't be here without him. And one of the things I've been thinking in relation to story, because lots has been related to story, with some other people as well, is that actually the first person is something about story that is really very helpful, okay? I've been using first person a lot, and I haven't got a chance to show you most of it, but there is first person stuff out there, and just ask me if you're interested in any of this stuff, on stories of having survived World War II. There are first-person stuff, accounts that have all been collected together of the sort of 1989 onwards period. But the quick example I want to show you today is from the 17th century. And the reason I'm latching onto first person today is because we're all scratching our heads. We've got all this wonderful stuff we want to teach, but we've got to make sure that it's coherent and it's connected. And we've got to find some way of bridging the gaps, if you like, mentioning the stuff that we're sadly going to have to leave out of our beautiful curricula because there just isn't time. I would really, really encourage you in relation to that connected and coherent idea to read the work of Nat Kesterton, who's done some wonderful narratives bridging the gap. And this I want to put in that space and say, I think this is another way that we can actually do some work on bridging some of those curriculum gaps. So, the 17th century. I think, this is why I'm going to have to click twice. Right. This is a small bit of one first-person story that we've been working with. So I'm just going to go through it with you. I was born near Ely in 1637. I was the daughter of a gentleman farmer and the eighth of 9 children. My mother was the daughter of a gentleman too. My father was a member of Parliament and important in the local area. He's now one of the most famous men in British history, Oliver Cromwell. His statue is still outside Parliament. I was only 5 years old when the Civil War began in 1642. My father was away fighting for Parliament and I stayed at home with my mother and younger siblings. Oliver Cromwell discovered a talent for soldiering and leadership. He played a very important role at the trial that led to the execution of King Charles in 1649. By 1653, he was Lord Protector of England. I was still only 16 years old in 1653 and I moved with my parents into the palaces of Whitehall and Hampton Court. I had my own apartments in both palaces. Okay, can you see the first person? The eye. So the weird colours are that we've got an awful lot going on in there. Okay, we've got some core knowledge, the red stuff. The Civil War began in 1642. That's a pretty important thing in the 17th century. But I have a horrible feeling that if kids do this really complex thing called the 17th century, they tend to sort of come out with that slightly dodgy thing about Roundheads and Cavaliers and possibly that old map where the country's divided in a really ahistorical way. They don't come out with a rich sense of the 17th century as a whole. But the Civil War is part of people's lives, undoubtedly. It's a big shaper. It's like the Second World War for the 20th. Got lots of hinterland knowledge in there. So, Oliver Cromwell having a talent for soldiering, I'm not sure it's essential kids leave school knowing and remembering that, but it's important to come across that knowledge in order to be able to do more. And just some gorgeous geek stuff. I mean, living in 2 palaces when you're 16, that's quite cool and geeky, isn't it? So the thing I want to make the point with this is that what I hope First Person can do is make the past interesting by putting people at the centre. It's less remote. They can be identified with a young girl who gets to live in 2 palaces. That's really connectable. I think they help the learning of core knowledge. It's embedded in story's privileged. There's an awful lot here, even in that short extract, but it's easier to get hold of at first. It's easier to refer back to later. Remember the young girl who lived in the palace? Who was her dad? And we get to Oliver Cromwell. And I think it provides some of that crucial hinterland knowledge, which is, as I said at the beginning, important for being able to move around in your knowledge. For example, Parliament was a thing then and a thing that still exists. Important stuff. Cromwell is still thought by some people to be important enough to have on a statue outside Parliament. It's the sort of knowledge that kids should be bumping into. So I would say to you, have a go at First Person. If you like the sound of some of this, then by May there'll be a whole load of 17th century stories in First Person dumped on the York Clio site, because my colleague Ruth Lingard and I are doing a whole hour on this at the HA conference. But you can start yourself. If you haven't come across the Ian Mortimer Time Traveller's Guide, that's all written as a First Person travel guide. And I've used that many times with Year 7 and they love it. And another one that would be immediate starting point would be something like Testament of Youth, for again the First Person description of some of the settings of the First World War. And as I say, there are many, many more out there. So if you like the idea of delving into some first-person work, then do get in touch, keep in touch, and let's share as widely as we can. Thank you.